Hello and welcome everybody to another event here on Friday afternoon with Halt to Harm Network. And my name is Ryan. I'll be the host today and really excited to have with me two very special guests from Environmental Health News. We've got Christina Marusik and Douglas Fisher. How's it going?
Hey, good.
Glad to be at Friday here, I can tell you that.
Yeah, so you've got some big news to share with us this week, coming out with a report on the response, the political response to your previous report called Fractured. And so just before we jump in, I just wanted to take a moment and say welcome to everybody that's here. Please say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We see a couple comments already. Christy, Andrea, JD, Gail. It's great to see you all. So yeah, say hi. And I know we're going to do a little bit of a recap of what the fractured report findings were, and then go into a little bit about the responses. But yeah, it's great to see who's here. And this isn't just relevant to Pennsylvania. One of the things we were just talking about in the green room was seeing ways that things from this conversation can apply to other places where you live. So I'm glad to see a good representation of geography here. So you ready to get started?
Yeah, so.
Awesome. Yeah,
thank you.
Right in, so.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for having us back. It's good to be here again, and thank you all for tuning in. First, I'll sort of quickly recap the Fractured series and what we did and what we found out, and then I'll tell you about this follow-up report that we're excited to share, and how you can help us maximize the impact of this project. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of quickly go through some slides about the project. And if you were on our last webinar, this will be familiar to you, so I won't spend too much time. But in the summer of, actually, we started this study probably in 2018. And I enlisted help from a number of scientific advisors to design a study protocol that would allow us to test urine samples and air samples and water samples from households in southwestern Pennsylvania that are surrounded by fracking wells, to try and take a look at whether chemicals coming from fracking wells were ending up in those places. So I talked to a whole bunch of scientists, as someone who has a background in journalism and not science, and got lots of help figuring out, what I'd want to do, what I'd want to avoid. I also went through an independent review board to get approval for the study. And then in the summer of 2019, I collected a total of 69 urine samples, 39 air samples, and 13 water samples from 5 families in southwestern Pennsylvania over about a 9-week period. Those samples were analyzed by researchers at the University of Missouri, who looked for 40 of the chemicals that are most commonly emitted from fracking wells. And we got that list of chemicals from previous air monitoring studies around the country. And what we found was that a lot of the chemicals that are commonly emitted from fracking wells were showing up in those samples we collected. So for example, in one household, a father and son, we found 12 chemicals that are commonly emitted from fracking wells in one or more of their urine samples, including things like benzene, toluene, and naphthalene that are linked to health impacts like respiratory and gastrointestinal problems, skin and eye irritation, organ damage, reproductive harm, and increased cancer risk. And that father and son had been experiencing some pretty severe skin issues and gastrointestinal issues, and both had worsening asthma. So they had suspected that they might be facing some exposures. They also lived at the time, there was a fracking well actually on their property about 400 feet from their home. So they were very close to a well pad. And then we also looked for biomarkers for harmful chemicals, because sometimes if the body has completely broken down something like benzene, for example, you might have been exposed to it, but you won't actually find benzene in itself in the urine sample because the body has already processed it. So we looked for these biomarkers that are the chemicals that are left behind after the body processes these chemicals. And that was also helpful because the CDC has published data on the levels of some of these biomarkers in the average American through the National Health and Nutrition Survey. So comparing our numbers against those, we found that the families had significantly higher than average levels of some of these chemicals. So for example, all 20 people in the study exceeded not only the average, but also the 95th percentile, which is the level that 95% of Americans fall below, for mandelic acid, which is a biomarker for ethylbenzene and styrene. Those chemicals are linked to similar health effects: skin, lung, and eye irritation, central nervous system, liver and kidney damage, and increased cancer risk. We also looked for hippuric acid, which is a biomarker for toluene, and one 9-year-old boy, actually the same boy who lived 400 feet from a fracking well, had a level of hippuric acid in his urine that was more than 91 times as high as the US median and nearly 5 times as high as the US 95th percentile. All right, I think that's probably. Oh, and we're still working on some statistical analysis, but we also noticed that we tested families who lived at a variety of distances from the nearest fracking well, and we found that families that lived closer to fracking wells had higher levels of certain chemicals in their bodies than families that lived further away. Let's see, I can probably safely stop screen sharing now. Is there anything super important that I missed in that recap, Douglas?
Whoa. No, I think you got everything there. That's a good overview.
All right, thank you. So to follow up on that reporting, about 3 weeks after the report came out, a group of 34 Pennsylvania senators and state representatives published a public letter to Pennsylvania's governor, Tom Wolf, and also to our Department of Environmental Protection and our Department of Health, kind of highlighting some of these findings from our study and urging them to take action to protect the health of Pennsylvanians. So they called on the Department of Health to use the same methods we used and do more widespread testing, similar to what we did, and they called on Governor Wolf to look more closely at regulating the industry in order to protect Pennsylvanians. But we were curious what other politicians who didn't sign that letter might be thinking about the report and how they might respond. So with the help of 2 Environmental Health News interns, I reached out to, I think it's like 37 additional politicians at kind of all levels of state government. And these are all Pennsylvania politicians for the time being, to give them like a 1-sheet explainer of what we found. All of our findings are documented in a 4-part series, and they're quite long. The pieces are quite long. They're, it's like 20,000 words in total. So I put together just a 1-sheet explainer of what we did and what we found. And then I sent them all the same 5 questions that included things like, what would you say to these families who found out their children are being exposed to harmful chemicals? What steps are you taking to ensure that Pennsylvanians are protected from this kind of harmful exposure? And how are you staying accountable to your constituents around issues like these? Most of them did not respond. So I got a kind of joint statement from Governor Wolf and the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Health that's very general. It speaks in very general terms about some of their initiatives related to regulating the oil and gas industry. And a handful of other politicians gave interviews and were willing to talk about this. And then a lot of them ignored us, repeatedly ignored our calls. A couple of press contacts for these folks even hung up on our reporting interns on numerous occasions when they were calling to follow up. And then a number of them declined to comment. So in previous reporting that I've done, I did a series a few years ago on Pittsburgh's childhood asthma epidemic and air pollution. And I did a similar follow-up with politicians about that one. And when I published their responses, including publishing information about who declined to comment and who blew us off, alongside their contact information, a bunch of folks started writing to politicians who wouldn't talk to us and tweeting at them specifically. And as a result of that public pressure, a number of folks who initially wouldn't talk to me actually called me and asked for an interview, which gave me an opportunity to, talk to them about the research and ask what they were going to do to, protect children's health. So we wanted to do something similar with fractured. So the new report that's out that we're here to talk about today documents. First of all, that includes a list of all of those lawmakers who signed the letter to Governor Wolf, because we're hoping that folks will thank them for taking the time and the initiative to do that. And then it also includes documents what everyone else said to us, including, whose people hung up on us. If they gave an interview, there's a link to their interview. And if they declined to comment, we included, the language they used when declining to comment. So we also put together some sample language that folks can use to follow up with these lawmakers that is linked to from the main post. I don't think we have, can somebody share the link to the new report in the chat? So there's a link in that new report to some of the sample language, but it's also great. So in an ideal world, I think it would be helpful as a nonprofit news organization. We can't advocate for specific pieces of policy. So our suggested language is pretty general. Thank you for taking the time to comment. I hope you'll continue to consider science and bring scientific knowledge into the way you create public policy. But I think what would be ideal is if folks who are doing work related to this issue and have specific pieces of legislation that they care about to tie this reporting into their advocacy around those issues. And also to, read the Q&As and read the interviews that people did give and then respond individually based on what they said and your response to that. So that is what we are asking for help with, essentially, is that we want your help holding politicians accountable and making them go on the record about this.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, Ryan, if you don't mind, Christina. I recognize a lot of names from our previous calls, but just in case you're new, so I'm Douglas. I run Environmental Health Sciences, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that focuses on the science and journalism of our environment and health. And Christina is our ace reporter at Environmental Health News, which is our journalism side of the organization. It's just, if I could just start off with there's some core beliefs. We believe that those whose health is affected by policy should have the driving voice in its creation, right? And that high quality science should be the foundation of public health policy. And I think what Christina's reporting here in Fractured found that the Pennsylvania, and I would argue that our kind of national policy on fracking is failing on both those counts, right? And that leads us to a third core belief in that progress is never the result of scientific discovery alone, right? It requires other forces: crusading journalism, activism, politics, just to name three, right? And so that's where everyone who's on this call, I would suggest, comes in. We can't do this alone with either the science or the journalism. It needs public pressure. Change doesn't happen without public pressure. And we've seen that with other reporting. We saw that, as Christina mentioned, with her Breathless series. on Pittsburgh air pollution. And I think we're going to see this here, and this is where, whether you're in Pennsylvania or whether you're in Colorado or whatnot. I mean, Christy Douglas, I was really excited to see, and I'd love to hear more if we can later in this call about how this work is helping your testimony. I just think that there's a relationship here that we can leverage and maximize for impact.
Thank you, Douglas.
So I think one of the things that I find really interesting about this is how it's very methodical, that you find all the different people who have decision-making power. And I guess I wanted to ask, what would be, what's the benefit of kind of holding people's feet to the fire in this way, and creating this infographic? Because that's one of the things on that report. If everybody clicks into it and you scroll down, there's actually a graphic that really breaks it down and uses color and things to very quickly kind of get a read on the situation. But what would be the benefit of this? Do you see this applying to other issues around environmental health? What's the model for holding people accountable?
Yeah.
How can we improve on that model? How can we use it to really win some protections?
That's a great question. One of the things I noticed while I was making these calls, I mentioned that I put together a one-page fact sheet. I know that politicians are super busy, so I didn't want to say, did you read these 20,000 words and now can you comment on it? I wanted to say, here's what you need to know about this. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you some very specific pointed questions. And I was really disappointed to find at the top of every call, for folks who did respond, you can see quickly from that infographic that a lot of people blew us off or declined to comment. But among the people who did speak with me, at the beginning of every call, I asked, did you have a chance to look over the information that I sent? And not a single person told me yes. They all were kind of like, oh, I've been really busy, but can you tell me about it really quick? And then, I get to schedule 30 minutes with these folks for an interview, and I need to get to my questions. So then I maybe spend 10 minutes trying to recap for them this very in-depth study that I spent 2 years on, to give them kind of the critical information. And then they're expected to, answer these kinds of tough questions about it. In fact, I spoke with one policymaker who the first question I asked was, what would you say to the parents of these children who are being exposed? And he reacted with shock and said, that's a really hard question. I didn't know you were going to ask me that. And I said, I sent you a list of 5 questions 2 weeks ago, and this is the first one. I don't know how else I could have helped you to prepare for this. At least he was willing to go on the record, and he did then attempt to answer the question. But to get back to answering your question, Ryan, I think, I'm aware that as a journalist, we face a really uphill battle when it comes to getting our reporting in front of the people who have the power to make these kinds of decisions. And so doing specific outreach to policymakers about this kind of thing, especially something like this, where we did some actual science that has some very serious implications. It's not super common for scientists to reach out to politicians and say, did you see the results of my study? And so, as Douglas mentioned, that's a lot of what we try to do at Environmental Health News. And I oftentimes think that part of my work is kind of translating scientific studies into something that can be useful for advocates and that policymakers can quickly understand and use to inform their policy decisions. But especially for something like this, and because we had that group of 34 politicians who issued that public letter to Governor Wolf, it seemed obvious that we should reach out to other folks who are in positions of power. And I didn't reach out to every politician, lawmaker in Pennsylvania, obviously. I reached out to a number of state senators and state reps, in addition to the ones who signed the letter. And then I also tried to reach out to like county commissioners, for example, in counties where fracking occurs, the mayor of Pittsburgh and a mayoral candidate of Pittsburgh, since this is an issue that's discussed here often. There is a fracking ban within the city, but not in the broader county and surrounding regions. Yeah. So I just think knowing that we face this uphill battle, and that these are the people who actually have the power to make meaningful decisions when it comes to protecting our health, I wanted to do everything I could to get the report in front of them, try to get them on the record in some kind of response about it, and then ask them what they're going to do next. So now that you have this information, what are you going to do about it? And that's another reason we're doing this kind of webinar with folks, is to ask, sometimes maybe a politician sees a headline go by and they clock it, but then they don't have time to read it. And then I reach out to them and I send them this one-page fact sheet. They don't really read it, but then I spend 10 minutes explaining it to them. And when I was explaining to this, people did kind of express shock when I would tell them some of these really startling statistics about the levels of exposure we saw. But then, if 10 or 15 of their constituents also send them this article, maybe at a certain point it comes across their desk enough times that they're like, okay, I should read this. I should spend some time with this. Or, enough people have demanded that I speak about this that I now feel like I have to. So this is all with the aim of, maximizing impact.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's also like you're not just doing this research and then putting it out and then just letting it get buried in the news cycle. You're saying like, no, like this is important and we need you on the record, like to tell us what you're going to do about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would argue it's not even our research that's getting buried. So Josh Shapiro, right, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, has a lot of things on his desk. And one of those things is a report that was issued a year ago, a grand jury report on fracking, if I remember correctly, right? And now I should confess that I'm in Bozeman, Montana. I'm a little removed from, but that fracking report, I've skimmed it and it looked pretty good. There were some good recommendations in it, but nothing's happened to it, right? So it's not just that our news stories go out and get lost in this news cycle. I think some really good work by government, policymakers can also get lost without pressure.
Right. So if we were to think about this as a model that people can learn from and replicate, part of it is if we are running campaigns, we don't want to. We need to know where people stand, and sometimes we know. Like I feel like a lot of times people feel like they know where their representative stands, and they don't want to do the effort of calling them because they're just going to get rejected anyway, right? So that's also an issue.
Yeah. Can I chime in? I just want to add on that particular point that when I spoke with Jean Ya, who is a conservative lawmaker here, who essentially just dismissed our report and said he won't take it seriously. And I also interviewed him for the series. And when I spoke with him the first time, I asked what he hears. He's on the State Energy Committee. Just for additional context, he's also one of 12 Pennsylvania GOP members who hosted Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani at a hotel to brainstorm ways to overturn the results of the state's presidential election. But when I spoke with him for the series, I asked him, what do you hear from your constituents about fracking? And he was like, no complaints. Everyone's happy. Everyone thinks that the industry is great. And so, if we don't, that's also a risk, right? Like, surely there is some constituent of his who has concerns about this, but that's probably what happens, right? They know his stance on this issue. and so people don't bother to reach out. But then that's a danger too. If he only hears from people who are supportive of his existing stance, then he doesn't feel accountable to people who may feel differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. So what are the, like, what do you feel like are the next steps, based on this information? Like, how can people use this to, resurface it, when politicians are running for office again, or like, what are all the various things that we can do with this now?
So Douglas and I spoke with a Pennsylvania-based advocacy group on Wednesday evening as a follow-up to our meeting with them. They put together an email with a bunch of click-to-tweets. So alongside the politician responses, if you're in that, the political response to Fractured, we listed everyone's contact information. That includes either an email address or a web contact form, a phone number, and a social media handle. And so they put together this list of click-to-tweets. So you just click the link and it pulls up Twitter and it pulls up a fully crafted tweet. And they had some effective tweets in there, I would say, where they sort of specifically said, why wouldn't you respond to this environmental health news report? Or the one to Senator Jean Yaw said, saw that you discredited this report because it hasn't yet been peer reviewed. Does this mean you'll now believe all the peer reviewed science? Something along those lines. So those are great because they give people a quick way to engage, right? All you have to do is click the link and the tweet is there and you can fire it off. Again, I would encourage folks to actually read the interviews with the folks who either sent statements or gave interviews. It's a little extra work, but if you have the time to then respond specifically to some of the things they said. What else, Douglas? What else is next?
Well, well, then there's the question of kind of how, if you're outside, a lot of us here on this call are outside of Pennsylvania, right? How can you take this to your community, kind of thing? And I would suggest that that these reports, the follow-up is fairly easily to digest. That some of these reports are you can also take to your lawmaker and say, hey, this came out of, this is what we're finding in Pennsylvania. What are we doing to assure that our residents aren't here, right? I mean, so I think again, it's a message that needs to be taken, and we have to. It's not just Pennsylvania. We just have to hold our politicians accountable to this.
Yeah, so part of why tweeting is effective is just so I can understand. I know not everybody here is like a Twitter expert, so I want to just break this down. It's like when you mention somebody in a tweet, it kind of goes out there. Is it on their wall now, like where they have to publicly respond to it? Like what would make that effective?
Yeah, so I think that's it exactly. Sending an email or making a phone call is certainly valuable, but that's kind of a private communication between you and the policymaker. Whereas if you're tweeting at them or even putting something on Facebook, it's public, right? So they may feel more pressure to respond. If they're getting 100 of the same tweet saying they're doing a bad job at their job, they might feel that that's some kind of PR crisis they need to address, right?
Right, that makes sense.
Hearing from their constituents is one thing, and then having this very public-facing critique is perhaps applies a little bit of pressure.
That makes sense. So by tweeting like hard-hitting questions at them, it not only is a notification that goes directly to their office and whoever's managing their Twitter account, potentially reaching them, but they also, it shows that they're not responding to it if they're not responding to it, right? So it kind of puts them on the spot in this public way. It also kind of goes on the record in a certain
Right.
sense, as long as in the way that Twitter functions. So it seems like there's a lot of value there.
And then it also, it's also an opportunity for other people to then engage and add their thoughts to the same thread and second that opinion, or bring up related issues, or bring up a related vote. So it also kind of opens the conversation to, more community participation.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great. So checking out that link, so everybody can go to the link to see the report and get on your newsletter as well to make sure that you keep getting content like this. And then you have the infographic that we can go through. Is this something like we had talked a little bit about, like using some tools like, call campaign tools or, letter writing campaign tools? I don't know if everybody's ever seen the, gotten like a, petition via email and you sign it and it uses a tool to, or when you make a phone call, when you like go to call your representative and then it kind of patches you in. So Halt the Harm Network, like we have a lot of this software available, and that's one of the things that we do is make it available to leaders in the network who want to use this, who want to create a campaign. So are there any ways that we can leverage some of these platforms and provide those for people that want to have campaigns?
Yeah, I think a call system could work. Again, I think it's for sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Ryan, to work with Halt to Harm and set that up. Now that we have kind of the responses out, and again, kind of it goes back to Christina's comment that it requires all of us to do a little homework and actually read the responses so that we're not just we're not accidentally blasting someone who maybe responded in a positive way, or we're not also congratulating someone for responding. I mean, I do think someone in here, Scott, actually, yes, you noted that we need to thank these lawmakers, right, for responding. And I fully agree. I think good news is just as good to get as, as pressure against those who are not responding. And we just have to, know who you're talking to when, as you call, but yes. I'd love to have a call thing set up.
And in that sample language we put together that I referenced, we do have sample language to thank the policymakers who signed that letter. And I think that's also important to let them know that people see their efforts and are engaged around them. That definitely encourages them to make similar initiatives in the future.
Cool, yeah. All right, so is there anything else that you want to talk about with this that I'm not asking you about yet?
I don't have anything specific in mind. I did want to see if we could hear from Christy Douglas, who said in the chat that she referenced the study in her testimony in Colorado. Christy, I don't know if you would call for coming on camera for a minute and telling us about that. That would be lovely.
Cool, yeah. So let us know in the chat, Christy, if you're still here. They might have left already and be catching the play. So
well, and if I could say, I'd love to, take advantage of this hive mind here. We've got 33 people involved. Just if any ideas about ways to kind of apply pressure, and how we as journalists could help with that, and how we can work together, how we leverage each of our kind of individual strengths.
Gotta let the dog out.
Sure.
Come on, Shay.
I mean, I like Jackie. I like that comment that you put in there about, kind of a tweet like "thank you" can help support a politician, help support a position.
All right. So we actually have a couple of questions in the Q&A that we can.
Oh yeah.
So the first one comes from JD. JD says, "Hey Douglas and Christina, would you be willing to comment during the Colorado Oil Gas Conservation Commission and possibly the Air Quality Control Commission? Keeping in mind you only have 3 minutes."
I think that would be great. I think it might be a challenge to get these results down into 3 minutes, but that is our task, and I think we could have some input there.
So, as part of my reporting, I spoke with some of the folks in Colorado who helped craft some of their new oil and gas regulations that they're in the process of implementing now. One of whom, I think his name is John Putnam, he actually has since left and is now working for the Biden administration in some capacity. But so this is just to say that I think there's already a clear opportunity for the state of Pennsylvania to learn from what Colorado has already done on this front. And the reporting includes quite a lot of context about what Colorado is doing and how they are changing the way they regulate the oil and gas industry to be more protective of health. And also some references, a number of the studies that they've done in Colorado. And there's been collaboration in the past between the forgive me for not remembering the name of the governing body, but Colorado's equivalent of the Department of Environmental Protection and Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection, where they did a literature review collaboratively, for example. So yes, we would be happy to do that. And I also think it makes sense for these states to be talking to each other.
Yeah, so I would ask JD maybe if you could get, maybe through Ryan or through Halt to Harm, we're on Halt to Harm, just message us about kind of how and when to get involved. I can do some research, obviously, but that would, a little information would be helpful, and we can get in there.
I also spoke with a number of researchers who gave testimony in the public hearings Colorado was doing about this. I guess maybe 2 years ago at this point, and kind of got their quotes are in the reporting for Fractured, and then they also kind of recapped what they did in Colorado and how effective it was. Yeah, just to further reiterate that I think there's a clear connection there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So the next question here is from Andrea. Says, "My own experience here in Massachusetts, we're all over the governor, land, sea, and air, and he is a brick wall. Nothing phases him. He's been barraged publicly, privately for years about his awful environmental record while pretending to be a climate champion. His treatment in improving the Enbridge compressor, for example." So says, "We are confounded." So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but maybe the question is what do you do when politicians are just being really slick and they're saying, they're responding as if they support this health study, but their policy shows that they are completely ignoring it?
Yeah, that's a big, tough question, isn't it? I know this was attempted when it comes to that specific compressor station, and it obviously wasn't effective, but a lot of times I think what folks do is kind of turn to more local branches of government to see if they can get any movement there. There was an incident here in Pittsburgh recently where U.S. Steel actually wanted to drill a fracking well at its Edgar Thomson mill, which is in a very dense urban area in Braddock, and the community did not want it. The community was very outspoken. I went to a community meeting where people were just shouting at oil and gas executives, like, get out of here, we don't want you in our community. It was very heated. And after, I don't know, 2 years of fighting, they convinced their very local, like the township board of supervisors, to revoke the permit, the construction permit for the well, which again, you know, that's like hyper local government. It's a township government that's comprised of like 5 elected officials or something like that. And once that permit was rejected, the Department of Environmental Protection said, we're not reviewing this anymore. And within 6 months, the project, US Steel canceled the project, and very publicly announced that the project was canceled and the lease was revoked, was returned, the mineral rights were returned back to US Steel from the company they had contracted with to drill the well. So that obviously didn't require the governor's attention, and it didn't even go through DEP. You know, it just found the Department of Environmental Protection. It wasn't even state level. So again, that's kind of different in different situations, but a lot of times, you know, starting local and working your way up can be an effective approach.
We've got another question here from PSR, Philadelphia Physicians for Social Responsibility. It says, we, PSR and Environmental Health Project, and coordinated with Center for Coalfield Justice, will be meeting with the DOH, Department of Health, in early June, and will ask about their response to this report, in addition to the content of the meeting concerning the promised investigations by the state into the health impacts of fracking. If you would please report about our meeting after it concludes, it would be really helpful. We are making slow progress, and a lift in the media puts effective pressure on them to get studies right. Can we coordinate?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Yeah, I'd be happy to. To the extent that I can either attend those proceedings or view them or get a recording afterwards, that's always helpful. Sometimes it's difficult to, from a news perspective, find a way to make a meeting interesting and newsworthy, find a way to craft a story about that, because meetings you weren't at are inherent, and especially with the DOH, they tend to be pretty bureaucratic. So I think with all of this broader context, it would certainly be possible to find a way in. But yeah, I'd be happy to coordinate on ways that we might be able to have some coverage of that.
Cool. And so if other people also are just, you know, in a similar situation where they're wanting to connect with you, and I guess what's the best way? So
go ahead, Douglas.
Well, you know, we here on Halt to Harm Network, right? There's ways to connect. You can reach me directly. Would be one. Christina, maybe we could share your email if you feel comfortable, you know, in here to reach you directly. Those are the 2 ways. Twitter, of course, is another great way to reach Christina or us. There we go.
Awesome. Perfect.
And I think I'm actually, I think it's not until September, but I'm giving a webinar about fractured to the Pennsylvania PSR chapter. Yeah, I think during one of their September sessions. So I am already kind of talking with PSR. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, one thing I wanted to you know, share with you and other people here is after connecting with you originally when you first put out Fractured, and doing the webinar, and just like we had a couple meetings. I don't know if everybody was here, you know, some folks here may not have made it, but we had a couple meetings where we strategized a little bit about how we could use this. And one of the things that came out of that process for me and for some other folks that Halt to Harm is putting together a kind of like your report is kind of like a briefing package in a way for somebody who wanted to talk about health impacts of fracking and like really run a campaign on that. And so whether you already have a campaign, like maybe you're fighting an injection well, or maybe you're fighting some active fracking in your region. Whether you already have a campaign or wanting to start a campaign, this topic becomes the kind of, I don't know, the words are losing me, but I guess it's like an entry point it's a conversation starter. It's an entry point. It's something that you can use that's very tangible and specific and relevant that you can use when talking to your neighbors. So it's not just about holding politicians accountable. I guess I want to just bring up that it's a campaign tool, and all the work that you've done creates a kind of briefing package that we could use to build talking points and build messaging and other things that we need to have to run a successful campaign. And so we're also working, like with my work with Halt the Harm, working with some folks who are fighting a merchant gas plant, which is a privately held power plant that exists purely for mining Bitcoin. So it's basically just burning fracked gas to run a bunch, like thousands of computers, for the sole purpose of solving math problems to make money. They're generating over $200,000 in profit a day running these computers, and they're only burning fracked gas and impacting the local community where they're running the power plant. And there's not even an argument around creating jobs. It's literally this. Anyway, I'm not even going to get started. Point being, that's another issue where we don't have somebody like you who's creating this incredible, like, package of content and stories and data, right? So we're kind of like trying to build that a little bit ourselves. But the process here is collect the talking points, collect the data, collect the issues into some kind of package that can be used to then create campaign materials and really launch a campaign that can put pressure on decision makers, but also just rally people. I think the other part of this conversation is actually building power with our community, not just pressuring the politicians, but building power in the long run. And I know I just said a lot of stuff, but yeah, could you speak a little bit to that, like, other side of this, of building campaigns?
Well, I'm wondering so I see a comment from Deb York, who's in Colorado, and was, looks like she maybe could fill us in where Christy Douglas kind of left off. I don't know if she's still here or if we wants to join us, but she might be able to speak on a more practical level about kind of how you take information and put it into a campaign.
Fantastic. I'll invite Deb to hop on screen with us. Yeah, Larry says in the chat too, grassroots is the key, pressure from the bottom. So if anybody is listening to that and is curious, please talk to me. We're in the incubation phase right now on this. So, hey, Deb.
I didn't mean to. Thank you. I'm from Colorado. So I know Christy, and it's great that she presented your study to the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission. They take public comment every Wednesday morning, our new commission. It's as of July 1st, it's a paid oil and gas commission. Last year it was volunteer. So the state has been working on rulemaking, and as I was a party to a number of the rulemakings. And we're also working, then most of the local governments are rewriting their oil and gas regulations across the state, since the majority of the state rulemaking is completed. However, I just want to say it's an uphill battle. It isn't, so we fought to get a 2,000-foot setback from residences, schools, and high occupancy buildings. And we, the Colorado CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health, had done a study that was a modeling study supporting short-term impacts from fracking up to 2,000 feet. So the new commission did use that study, and we got a 2,000-foot setback with lots of variances, lots of off-ramps. And so what we're really fighting right now is getting reverse setbacks and strong reverse setbacks. And Colorado continues to develop at a rapid pace. And so that's still a huge battle. So as well as financial assurance. We Frack Tracker has done a look at our financial status, and we have about 2% of the $8 billion we need to cap our wells, so our orphan wells. So anything else I can update on? Thank you for your study. I just want, it's an awesome study, and I was actually preparing something for our county commissioners. I was going to use your study next week, as well as PSR, the compendium that came out in December. And thank you for Help to Harm. You do so much to get information out there.
So Deb, I'm just wondering personally, you know, as an invested party here, how does journalism help that work that you're bringing to the commission, and maybe how can this network help, or how does it help? You know, and what we can do, to move this further.
Well, I thought it was really interesting what you said earlier about it, you know, really needing the three prongs. I think that what you have done in your study and how you're trying to help people use it is incredibly impactful. What we've done locally and statewide is, you know, that we've contacted reporters. We've asked reporters to comment on studies. We've alerted reporters when events are occurring, and we've written letters to the editor. And but you know, I think it's always the battle is that the industry has paid people who work full time, and the activists are part-time often, and volunteer, and journalists and local politicians are spread pretty thin. So I think it's just doing the best we can. I think if in regards to what you all can do, I think you have done a great job with this study and keeping it up front. I mean, what you just did with contacting politicians is a roadmap. I was going to see if, you know, if I can spread the video link to local activists about what you did with that. I think that's awesome. I don't know if I have any other answers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I go away now?
Thanks, Deb. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is like kind of how do we keep this up front, frankly, that Deb mentioned, right? And frankly, whether it's a campaign or whether it's a reporting, the media cycle is so fast that things just get washed away in the fire hose. And I see Andrea's comment that reporters and coverage is so important. As a journalist, you know, running a journalism organization, I tend to agree. But how do you hold people's attention? And I think that's kind of our challenge as reporters. It's like, okay, well, what are we going to do next? And that's a discussion Christina and our editorial team will be having. Like, okay, now we've done the politicians. You know, what's the next kind of? I think we're looking at, like, every month we want to have something out that kind of keeps the pressure on, because I don't want to let these guys away and gals.
Would you, because you cover environmental health news, and so if somebody was running a campaign, would you report on their campaign, or like, I guess what are you looking for in terms of a follow-up on this, 6 months from now, if you were to create an article? Is there anything that we all can do, to help?
So probably, demonstrable impact would certainly be worth reporting on. If we saw, we reported on the fact that these policymakers issued this letter to Governor Wolf. If someone were to, if that were to turn into policymakers proposing a bill based on this, that would be newsworthy. If, there's something really I'm planning to actually follow up. I think the next thing we'll do is I'm planning to follow up with the families that are featured in the series and ask them, you know, what's changed since the series came out? How does it feel having this information out in the world? How have you been able to use this as a tool? How can others support you? And what do you hope comes next out of this? So I think that's what's up next for us. And yeah, I think just continuing to try to, you know, as I mentioned, as I was calling these policymakers, they, for the most part, were not familiar with the report and hadn't even taken the time to read a one-page summary. So the more we can push to kind of get the right eyes on this, the eyes of people who are in positions of power and can pull these levers, I think that would be really helpful.
Awesome. And are you still running a survey around impacts?
Douglas?
We are. We do have a survey going. It's been a little while since I've looked into it, but yes. At the top of that first fractured kind of our overview, we do have a link, you know, or not the top, but in that story, we do have a link to where you can report a story or you report your kind of impact, how this intersects with your life, and we would, you know, we'll use that, and that's another opportunity for us to follow up and to you know, kind of push the story out into other areas.
I'll drop a link in the chat here.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, let's see. We're almost at the very end of this session. So is there anything else you want to say as we wrap up?
I continue to be grateful for the engagement that we see here and the energy, and I think, you know, like Andrea has shared a number of kind of news stories that are related. You know, it's having an impact. You know, yes, you've got a wall and you're governor of Massachusetts, right? But I think we can see some breakthroughs. It's like that U.S. Steel story that Christina reported. Sometimes it feels like we're forever butting our heads against a wall, and then something good breaks through. And I think we need to celebrate that and recognize that it's not always, you know, we're not just blowing in the wind here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Cool.
Thank you, Marion. I just saw Marion Cook's comment about a letter. That's exciting. And thank you, Philadelphia PSR. I hope I'll hear from you about the next initiative you mentioned. Yeah, just thank you all for showing up, for being engaged around this issue, for being willing to come listen to us talk about this again, and for all the work you do. It's really appreciated, and it's making a difference.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, it was great to see you both, Christina and Douglas. Hope we can stay connected. And thanks everybody who came today. The replay will be here as soon as we wrap up.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Have a fantastic day, and we'll be in touch.
Have a good weekend.
Take care.